is the Victorian Country Hour with Warwick Long on ABC Radio Victoria.
And a very good afternoon to you, Warwick Long, with the Country Hour again, coming to you from Wentworth, where the Darling meets the Murray and where plenty of discussion about the future of the Murray-Darling Basin is still taking place on, in the venue around me, which is quite an amazing venue. It is the Wentworth Civic Centre. It's been sitting vacant for 5 years. This is like the first event that has been here in 5 years, and already you can see people in suits and so forth, lots of long talks. Ministers have been discussing the way forward for the Murray-Darling Basin, and we'll be having a look at that in more detail today. So yesterday on the program, if you missed it, you can go in and check out our podcast and have a listen to what we talked about there. But we focused on community. We focused on a lot of the local government areas up and down the river system. We talked about whether they were surviving, whether they were dying, whether they were thriving. And we heard a lot of them are getting quite a lot of investment at the moment, but there was still some frustrations in water policy. Today, you'll get to meet some more of the decision makers. We're going to hear about some of the way forward, the future of the basin, including some downright scary data on what's already happened to the region's climate. I'll let you judge that more when we talk about that later on this morning. But we're going to start today with money that was promised long ago. It's been around 3 years since the federal government announced $40 million for cultural flows in the Murray-Darling Basin, but Indigenous communities are still waiting for their water. The Murray-Lower Darling Rivers Indigenous Nations, or Mildren, say they are struggling to even get the Federal Minister for Water, Keith Pitt, to speak to them about it. The chair of Mildren, Grant Rigney, says cultural flows could be a game changer for Indigenous communities.
The Mildren delegation had a definition of a cultural flow. It's called the Echuca Declaration. That was done in 2007. So cultural flows are legally beneficially owned waters for cultural, spiritual, economical purposes for those nation groups to process in there, and that is their inherent right for that water at the same time.
The $40 million for cultural water, it was announced around 3 years ago. It's still not here. What's happening?
Yeah, good question. We have been waiting. It was announced by David Littleproud that there was going to be $40 million for a water purchase, for First Nations groups in the Murray-Darling Basin, $20 million for the Northern Basin and $20 million for the Southern Connected Basin. We went into David Littleproud's office in Parliament, said to David, we would like to actually establish a trust to get these resources out of government and into the trust, so we can actually start formalising a process through a distribution policy of how nation groups could tap into that monies. And unfortunately, he didn't want to go down that pathway. Minister Littleproud at the time told us that he would prefer to be going through the Indigenous Land Sea Corporation. Eventually, IOSC basically were moved out of the tent, as per se, and then the dialogue again sat stagnant for a long period of time. Even though, again, the Federation had sent numerous letters to the ministers, and then the portfolio changes happened, and Littleproud moved out into agriculture, and Minister Pitt came in for the last year and a bit. So I think it was December in 2020, we had our last dialogue with his agency, Department of Agriculture, about establishing a trust model. Again, the department went back to the minister, and there was a brief that was sent up from the department to the minister's office, and they didn't hear anything right up till present day. So
you're still waiting?
We're still waiting. We've asked Minister Pitt to meet us at the table and have some dialogue around what his thoughts are around this, so that can give us a clear direction about whether we want to be involved, or how we can best add value to how we can actually establish the $40 million into water for our people on ground. And now the department have turned around nearly 3 years later and said, "Oh, look, we would prefer to go down a trust model." So
and that's what you asked for to begin with.
And 3 years earlier we asked for that exact same thing. So I was a bit perplexed about it and pretty annoyed, to tell you the truth. But at the end of the day, we thought we can do that, but we wanted to have a northern trust and a southern trust. But Pitt didn't want to go down that avenue. He wanted one trust for the whole of Basin. We took it, the Mildren delegation took it back to our delegate members. They endorsed that we could go down a One Trust model and we could actually initiate that dialogue, and we haven't heard anything back from him since.
So how would that trust work in your mind to own and use that $40 million for cultural water?
I think there's a few ways we could actually look at it. The trust itself, you need to have the trustees of the trust. So you need some people with expertise and skill sets in those areas and know what a trust is actually about. So, we were sort of banding around that we could potentially put it out for an expression of interest across the basin for all nation groups. So we're not exclusive. We want to be inclusive so everyone has input.
So you'd use that water for the benefit of individual nation groups each year, or would you trade it and try and build up the portfolio? How do you see it working?
Well, from my point of view, I think that we need to be pretty smart and pragmatic about it at the same time. We certainly do want water to be utilised by our member groups on country to benefit economies and ecologies, I should say, and biodiversities within their own landscape, but also having the opportunity to build up entrepreneurship within their actual own backyards, whether it be cropping or some type of aquaculture industry or whatever it may be. But we don't want any caveats put on how that $40 million could potentially be utilised. So I would prefer that if we quarantined a proponent of those resources for water trading over a period of time to build up a revenue base from the investment into water trading, then we wouldn't be going back to government saying, look, we require more resources, and that would actually save the federal government in some of those areas. But we need to have that opportunity for that to be enabling to happen.
So not only would you be able to use that initial money for cultural flows, you'd be able to trade that water and build up the nest egg, so to speak, so you could get more water and then be able to do more with that water for cultural flows.
That's correct, and we need to build that portfolio.
Because $40 million doesn't seem like a lot of money for water when you're thinking about spreading it across the myriad of Indigenous communities across the Murray-Darling Basin.
That's right. It's not a great deal of money. I mean, it is, but in the water atmosphere, it's not. There are some site catchments at the moment within, say, the Murrumbidgee. You'd be looking between $4 to $6 million for 1 gigalitre of water. So if we purchase, say, $20 million worth of water in the Murrumbidgee, you'd only be looking at about 3 odd, up to 4 maximum gigalitres of water. And then how do you diversify that down into, it could be potentially up to nearly 80 different nation groups within that area itself. So, I mean, the distribution policy of the trust is going to be an essential part of that process, and what is the criteria that needs to be met to actually tap into that monies in the first place.
How close do you think you are to getting this money and actually being able to use it for cultural flows?
I really couldn't answer that, to tell you the truth. I know that Keith Pitt, the Minister for Water, has asked Sir Angus Houston from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, the new chairperson, to get together the peak bodies of the Murray-Darling Basin, and that included New South Wales Lands Council, Federation Victoria, the Native Title Services Corporation in New South Wales, Mildren and the NBAN confederations. And we did have that dialogue with Sir Angus over a week and a half ago, and he was taking it to Minister Pitt last Wednesday, but we still haven't heard anything from the Minister's office about that outcome.
So I suppose the main thing you're asking for now is the Minister to get in contact with you?
Yes, we've been waiting for a while. We sent the Mildren Confederation sent the Minister a letter over nearly a month and a half ago now, 2 months ago, and we still haven't had a response. I don't understand why the Minister thinks that he needs to go to Sir Angus Houston to ask to call the peak bodies together, whereas his office could have done that straight away and just come to the table and at least have the common courtesy to respond to our correspondence that we sent you over a month and a half ago.
This is a government commitment. Why do you think the Minister's being so tardy?
It's a very good question. Maybe there's, in politics there's always the smoke screens, and sometimes you don't see, beyond the screen to see what the actual reality of it is. But I would have a guesstimate to say that the Minister's a bit concerned that his constituencies have some concerns over, water being taken out of their catchments or out of the system altogether. That potentially could be going to maybe irrigators or cotton or rice growers or citrus or perennial crops. So I think there are those concerns, but in trying to put those concerns to rest, First Nation groups have never ever had the opportunity to own water to this level, and we certainly been negated our human rights in this space, and we want them to be looked at seriously. We are the most deprivated and degraded groups of one of the most in the whole of the country, not just the Murray-Darling Basin, and we're trying to actually do some betterment for our peoples, for our youth, and to reset some of those practices and injustices of the past, so hopefully leading into the better future for First Nations peoples.
Are you frustrated?
Oh, absolutely. But sometimes, you go very angry. But I think to myself, where does that get us if you start going down that pathway? And people just pack up and they don't engage when you start getting into those type of areas of anger and frustration. So it's about being pragmatic about it. It is what it is at this moment. Not happy with it. Absolutely not happy with it. And we want change, and we want change now.
That is the chair of Mildren, which is the Murray Lower Darling Rivers Indigenous Nations, Grant Rigney, speaking to you there. 0467 842 722 if you'd like to send a text to us on the Country Hour. Already somebody sent a thought that's saying cultural flows is cultural flows, not trading, irrigation or aquaculture. That's what's causing the current problems. No name on that text. But as you heard from Grant, they were looking at using their $40 million to try and get a bigger pool of water for cultural flows, and that's what they're asking for, or that's what their plan is to do with that water. You can send us another text and tell us what you think about that if you'd like. It's 17 past 12 here on the Country Hour though, and I wanted to bring our next guest onto the program after hearing him talk yesterday, because there were some quite frank figures about how the climate in the Murray-Darling is doing and what that means for inflows of water. And no matter where you are in the river system, it's the inflows that matter for the water moving throughout the system, whether it be for irrigation or for environment or ultimately making it out to sea. Francis Chu is the Group Leader of Water Resources Assessment and Prediction Water Resource Management Program at CSIRO. Nice long title, Francis, but basically means you're looking at just that, the water and the climate and what's changing and how things are working in the Murray-Darling Basin.
Yeah, absolutely, Warwick. So I was talking on this conference about climate change impact and what it means to water resource adaptation in a basin.
And what was incredible to me, to jump straight into it, is you put up a graph, and graphs make terrible radio, but looking at the water inflows in an area like Perth, and we've talked about Perth and climate change a myriad of times on the program, where you can see rainfall's going at one level and then over a decade it almost steps down a huge chunk and you're getting less, and then it's stepped down again and it's being less. You showed the Murray-Darling system's inflows, and it was ticking along at one level for a long period of its existence, and then there's been a step down to a lot less inflows. What has happened there?
So I think we see that mainly in Perth, because since the mid-1970s, there's not one single year in the record which is as much as the long-term average prior to 75. So it is a step jump you were talking about. So one of the main causality of that is in a warmer world. We expect the Hadley cell to be actually expanding. The westerly systems that you and your listeners might hear about, the cold fronts that's coming through, it's been pushed further south, so it's missing the South Australian landmass and disappearing into the ocean. So the projections, and certainly what we're seeing, if we're getting less cool season rainfall.
So that rain coming through that used to hit Perth isn't hitting Perth anymore. It's sweeping below it a lot more often. And is that the same system affecting the basin?
Yes, and Victoria is a bit further south again, so it's only starting to affect us now, and that's what you're seeing. In fact, you're seeing that across all the mid-latitudes in the southern hemisphere. You're seeing that in southern Africa, you're seeing that in southern South America. So Part of the problem with the southern parts of Australia is most of our runoff or most of our water that we get are also generated in the winter months and spring months. So if I were to tell you that your winter rainfall has reduced, you're going to get less rainfall in the months that your flows are actually generated, and that translates to your significant decline in your winter and hence your water availability collectively.
So there you go, all the grain growers and so forth that are listening now, hearing that, less rain through winter months, that immediately affects them. But for those irrigators, those other farmers who are irrigating, they're hearing that, less rainfall also means lower runoff.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got a general rule of thumb that we say that if you've got a 10% change, whether it's increases or decreases, or 10% decline in rainfall, that tends to be accentuated or amplified as a 20 to 30% reduction in your flows.
That's fascinating. So 10% less rainfall means 20 to 30% less inflow.
And you get that accentuated also because of a higher evaporation demand with increasing temperatures, so that further accentuates the decline in your stream flows.
So the ground's drier with a 10% less rainfall, and so less water makes it into runoff. And then after that, once it makes it the dam, you've got higher temperatures that are evaporating more water. That's a double whammy.
Yes, absolutely. Not necessarily just from a dam. I mean, from the catchments itself.
Yep.
And the crops that you grow and things that rely on the water, the demand also increases because of the higher temperatures. Yeah. But it is a general rule of thumb that you want to that your listeners can be familiar with. So a 10% decline in rainfall translates to a 20-30% decline in stream flows.
And are you seeing that now in the Murray-Darling?
So we're seeing something that is worse than now, but that brings another layer of important information around the variability that we see in our system. So we in fact live in a river system that's twice more variable than other river systems in the world. So we see swings of wet and dry years. So in a wet year, we can get flows that are 20 times more than in a dry year. So we see all that anyway. So we got high flows, low flows, high flows from year to year. We are currently in a wet period, for instance. We'll continue to see that. So under climate change, we'll still see these wet years, but we'll still see the dry years, but all this is happening in the background of a drying trend. So the droughts that we see, that we are coping with, say once every 10 years, that might happen once every 8 years or once every 5 years. So we've got to cope with more frequent and more severe droughts, I suppose.
Yeah, so there still could be wet years. There
will be wet years. There will still be wet years like now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But what you're saying is the overall trend is showing lower inflows, lower rainfall.
So
for
you
the
get more and more of your dry years and more of your droughts that you got to cope with. And honestly, in terms of water resource management, like what we're talking about in this conference, it's really not about managing the averages. I mean, no one cares during a wet year. In fact, no one cares during an average year. We are probably concerned when we got 2 or 3 dry years, and that 2 or 3 dry years that we see historically will probably be more often in the future.
Well, then that leads to the big question that I'm almost nervous to ask, Francis, but is it going to get worse?
It is going to get worse. It means that we've got to value water more. It means that we've got to squeeze more value out of the water. We are quite hardy, resilient society. It's really appreciating it, and knowing how to adapt, and knowing how we share it. It's challenging, but we just got to appreciate the water more and how we can actually share that better.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and probably telling us what we didn't want to hear, but important information. Anyway, Francis Chu, thanks for coming on the Country Hour.
Thank you. Warwick.
I'll get you to hand the microphone to our next guest. You're listening to the Country Hour. It's 23 past 12, but as you just heard, 10% less rainfall means 20 to 30% lower inflows, and we're already seeing worse than that, were the words from Francis Chu from the CSIRO. He does a lot of work on water, looking at the climate effects on the Murray-Darling Basin. We are at the Murray-Darling Association conference here in Wentworth. We're in the Wentworth Civic Centre at the moment. People are having lunch. They're spread far and wide, and I can see them grabbing food and putting it in their mouths, and I've grabbed our next guest away from just that to talk to us on the program now. Claire Miller is CEO of the New South Wales Irrigators Council. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've just heard the CSIRO say how that things are going to get worse in terms of inflows for the basin. What does it mean to the farmers that you represent?
So we have members in every valley right across the Murray-Darling Basin, and what we do know from the climate records, so just repeating really what Francis said, is that inflows over the last 20 years compared to the wet decades of the last century have almost halved in every valley. So it's in the north and in the southern basin. And this presents real challenges. averages mean nothing. So our challenge for all of our irrigators, regardless of where they are, is how water policy and water management and reforms are going to try and even out what will be prolonged dry periods with probably more intense and larger rainfall, but less frequent rainfall events.
Is one of the great difficulties, and you may not be the person to ask this, is one of the great difficulties, though, when you have a step down showing that there will be less available in the system over a longer period of time. We may have bought water for the environment. That's still being allocated, though. Water to irrigators is still being allocated. The big figures of when we speak about over-allocated water resource systems, we're still trying to work off those original numbers. It's just who owns it that is different. Is there a difficulty caused by that?
I see it more that, it's important to understand with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, particularly in the Southern Basin, that the environment now owns 28% of the entitlements that used to be either directly used by irrigators or were used to support the irrigation system through the districts and so forth. And on top of that, the environment, of course, has also always had the run of the river flows as well. So you'll see in 2019-20, extreme drought year in the Murray. You look at Water New South Wales numbers, irrigation only used 9% of the total water that was going through the system, and most of it was either held environmental water or this run of the river, which is the bulk. So I'm not sure they're just constantly buying back more water for the environment is the answer here.
I'm not talking about buying back, because even if you buy it back, it's still got to be allocated to the environment. That water still is sort of sitting in the system. It just has a different owner.
It just has a different owner, yes, and it's just put through the system for a different purpose, probably at different times of the year and so on. But that water is still there, of course, in the system. One of our challenges going ahead with climate change is all the models that inform or spit out the numbers for recovery in the Murray-Darling Basin Plan are based on a 120-year records. The last 20 years, if they represent a step change, I think we're going to have to modify. The answer is not to keep on buying back more water for environment to try and keep a river going of the last century. We might need to take a look at what those rivers would look like under the climate change scenario, and consider our water sharing on that basis.
Well, you got up yesterday and called for the Basin Plan deadlines which set for 2024 to be extended yesterday. We've heard rumblings from state governments about this, but I know the Federal Water Minister Keith Pitt on our program just weeks ago after Minco was saying no, we are going to reach these goals on time, as that has been our firm commitment all along. Is that possible? Will the Basin Plan meet its 2024 deadline?
No.
Why doesn't the government admit that?
First, I'm going to deal with it's not going to meet it because several of the projects that are part of that 605 offsets program, we know they're either not going to be achieved or they're going to fall short. That's just a fact of the matter. And under the Basin Plan, you've got a guillotine effect that you can then just return back to buybacks. This, we feel, is just basically punishing communities when it's not, they're not the ones that have created the problem. They've done their best. And so, you've got this sort of guillotine effect. I think Mr. Pitt, the Minister, is, let's just take a look at the politics, though, because in the end, the only way you can extend those deadlines and introduce flexibility into that SIDLAM program, because right at the moment you can't add new projects, even when you have fabulous new projects that should be explored, such as what Murray Irrigation has come up with to sort of better get water into billabongs and things.
So these are projects that save water, can take the actual amount of water that's needed for the environment down because they're providing an environmental benefit, and you're saying that there's no way to put new
projects into the mix. So we need the Basin Plan amended for greater flexibility so that new projects can be brought into the mix, new knowledge, new ideas, fresh faces, all that sort of thing. And we need those deadlines extended to be realistic, because there is one of the key parts of it is constraints management, and to do that you're going to need to get voluntary flood agreements with more than 3,000, possibly 4,000 landowners. Now, if you're going to do that properly in actual partnership with the community and gain people's trust, that is going to take decades. So it was always an unrealistic deadline.
So constraints being the constraints on the river system effectively. So if you're going to put more water down, you don't want to be taking out bridges or flooding people's homes.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, exactly. And there's a lot of
no way known you think the government can do that work in the next 3 years?
Oh, good God, no. The Productivity Commission nailed it when they pointed out that it took 8 years to get ostensibly 103 landowners between Yarrawonga and Hume to agree to what were relatively modest changes in their voluntary flood agreement, the flood easements to do with operations of Hume, nothing to do with the basin plan. That took 8 years, and there's still a few of those landholders who are still not on board. That's only 103.
I've got two questions for you quickly just before we go. The idea then of the basin plan not being delivered on time, why aren't politicians out then talking to us that this might happen, given at the moment most water ministers saying, oh look, most of the work has been done, most of the basin plan has been done, and people need to just get used to the new conditions? The parts where the basin plan has been successful are not well recognised, and so in that sense they're right. If you look at the volume of water that's been recovered already in the Southern Basin, it was enough during an absolute stress test of this last drought in 1920. The lower lakes met all of their KPIs. They stayed above sea level, their salinity levels stayed above the KPIs, they still had fish breeding events. So even with the water that we've already recovered, they're actually hitting all of their basin plan KPIs. So in that sense, we probably might need to rethink the whole water recovery issue. But all of that requires all sides of politics to come to the table. And so you would need to convince, this is a political question, the only way you can amend the basin plan and bring in greater flexibility and recognise, and have that conversation, is you are going to need to get bipartisan support in the Senate. And I leave everyone to make their own conclusions about what the chances are of that right now. That requires different governments to give ground on what could be against their wills, and they're not going to want to do that.
And it also requires the Labor Party, perhaps, to admit that it wasn't necessarily their best day in 2012. The basin plan that was agreed to then, it's supposed to be an adaptive management plan. It is supposed to be able to adapt to new knowledge, new ideas, new science, better science. That's where we get new projects. And in fact, it's very rigid and it can't adapt. So there's a responsibility there, I think, on all sides of politics.
In the interest of time, I will just finish on this. We have to ask you about the disallowance in New South Wales in that parliament there about water sharing plans and what that meant for New South Wales irrigators. I know you're going to Victoria today. I know a lot of Victorian groups gave a cheer at that because they want tighter regulation of floodplain harvesting, more regulation of metering in New South Wales. In your opinion, I'm just putting words in your mouth here, why will they be wrong to be asking for strengthening of those areas before it becomes law?
Okay, so the regulations that were disallowed were the regulations that enabled what everybody says that they want, which is reducing, licensing and accurately measuring floodplain harvesting take. And we're talking about a reduction of about 30% in what irrigators would be allowed to harvest. And I won't go into the accounting because it's too long and too boring. People could call me if they want me to go through that. So it was really disappointing to see them disallowed because, in fact, that leaves floodplain harvesting as an allowed water take under the 1912 Water Act, so more than century-old act, and it leaves it completely unrestricted. And
other groups see that differently, though.
I know that other groups have other legal opinion. Our legal opinion, and that's we know a lot of our individual members have got, says no, it just leaves it uncontrolled and unregulated, and that is not what we wanted.
So your members going to go in for a free-for-all and just take the water they think they're entitled to?
We advise them all to get their own legal advice because each of them is in different parts of the floodplain, and different rules and things may apply under current water sharing plans, but certainly our legal advice is it leaves floodplain harvesting unregulated and uncontrolled, and that is not where we want to be. We support a reduction, we support the regulations. We've had a completely separate issue it's not completely separate, but this question of how you improve connectivity when it's not flooding, because when it floods, as we can see right now, connectivity is not an issue, but how do we improve connectivity with climate change in those drier periods straight after when droughts break? And we support good protocols and rules around that, but that is going to take a bit of time to work that out. The worst thing that we could have happen right now is some arbitrary number being plucked out of the air and agreed to as a political deal behind closed doors, because that's the kind of legacy it's going to cause a problem in another couple of years once the science has been done. And it's one of the reasons why we've ended up with a lot of perverse outcomes in the basin plan to begin with. Those sort of deals. 10 years ago.
I could push back on a few of those points, but in the interest of time, we will finish. That's the New South Wales Irrigators Council CEO Claire Miller joining us. Thank you very much for that. You're listening to The Country Hour. We are broadcasting live from Wentworth, where the Murray-Darling Association Conference is on, and I am late for the news. My apology to Richard Crabtree, who's been waiting patiently. Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon, Warwick. A man who shot at a jet ski rider on the Murray River last year has escaped having a conviction recorded against his name. Police say the 51-year-old was on a houseboat near Moama on December the 27th when he fired 2 shots in the direction of a 21-year-old man. In the Albury local court this week, Brett Hickman was found guilty of 4 charges, including firing a gun in a public place and possessing drugs, but no conviction was recorded. He was sentenced to an 18-month conditional release order, which orders him to be of good behaviour and not commit any offences during that time. An Australian First Water Catchment study has overturned the belief that rivers are quick to bounce back from drought. Monash University examined 161 catchments and found some will trap rainfall for years after a drought event. Researcher Dr. Tim Peterson says many catchments are stuck in a low runoff state, including the Wonnangatta and Cairn rivers in Victoria's east, where 100 millimetres of rain created about 30% less stream flow. The Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission has charged a Victorian police officer over an alleged assault in Warrnambool last year. The leading senior constable has been charged with recklessly causing injury and common assault relating to an incident last July, which IBAC says occurred while the officer was on duty in Warrnambool. The matter will be brought to the Warrnambool Magistrates Court in October. And the Mayor of Mildura hopes a new agreement for local councils to switch to renewable energy from July will encourage other levels of government to follow suit. 46 local councils have signed up to the Victorian Energy Collaboration, believed to be the largest emissions reduction project by local government in Australia. It means almost half of Victorian council electricity will come from renewables. Mildura Mayor Jason Modica says the collaboration is setting a bold example. That's all the news for now. For more, visit our website abc.net.au/news.
Thanks, Richard. Richard Crabtree there with regional news headlines. Let's head across to the Weather Bureau. Actually, just before I do that, we usually throw social media corner in right about now. And if you go to the ABC Rural Facebook page, you will see a photo of Stephen from Curlwa. Yes, I got to meet him yesterday, regular ABC texter. We got a photo together. It absolutely made my day. I don't know about Stephen's, but I was just happy to put a face to the regular texting name. So ABC Rural on Facebook if you want to check that out. We are live from Wentworth. Matthew Thomas is live from the Bureau of Meteorology and he can join us now. G'day, Matthew.
Hello.
What are we looking at around Victoria today?
Okay, so current conditions, there's a little bit of high cloud, particularly about the northeast of the state. We'll see the high cloud increase from the west during the day as a cold front begins to approach from the southwest. So a dry day for the remainder of today with a northerly stream. For tomorrow, that cold front will brush the south of the state during tomorrow morning and the afternoon, with a high-pressure system to build quite quickly about southwestern Victoria into the late afternoon and move over central Victoria into the evening. So it's really a ridge replacement rather than a cold front crossing the state. We're looking at scattered showers developing about the southwest in the early morning, extending to central districts near sunrise, but with isolated showers extending into the southern Wimmera in the early morning and to Gippsland and the eastern ranges from late morning. We're expecting around 1 to 5 millimetres about the southwest and the central districts, less than 2 millimetres about the southern Wimmera and through Gippsland and over the eastern ranges, and mostly dry conditions north of the Divide. However, the temperature's generally around 16 to 19 degrees, but reaching up to 21 degrees about the northwest. On Friday, the high will lie over Victoria and a dry day is expected. There'll be the chance of some morning fog, most likely about the south of the state, and the chance of some early frost, and that will most likely be north of the Divide. The high will sit out to the east of Victoria on Saturday and Sunday and Monday, with on the weekend, dry and mostly sunny weekend. The chance of some morning fog and frost, most likely in central and eastern parts of the state. On Monday, northerly stream will freshen late ahead of an approaching front. Some possible morning fog about the east, otherwise a dry day with increasing cloud. Tuesday's the most interesting day. The front will begin to cross Victoria on Tuesday with fresh and gustily northerly winds shifting westerly as the change moves across. We'll see showers develop about the west and extend to most districts during the day, but little reaching East Gippsland. We're looking around 5 to 10 millimetres about much of the state, with only really around 5 millimetres about the Mallee, around 10 to 15 millimetres about the eastern ranges, but less than 2 millimetres about East Gippsland. So Tuesday's the most interesting day if you're looking for rainfall.
We'll watch with bated breath. Matthew, thank you so much for the update.
Okay, have a great day.
Matthew Thomas there, senior forecaster at the Weather Bureau, joining you on the Country Hour today. It is 22:01, and I reckon our next guest is someone who many people have been wanting to grab and talk to a lot, because he's coming into a really interesting job. Troy Grand is the Murray-Darling Interim Inspector General on water compliance, and I should put interim in front of that, shouldn't I, for the moment. Troy, welcome to the Country Hour.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Warwick. Great to be with you.
And, well, first things first, can we get an update on where things are at with your job? Because there's still an Act of Parliament that needs to go through, and before you can start operation fully. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The reason it's interim is that there is no legislation there to become a statutory body, so we're a matter of weeks away, from my understanding, for the legislation to be introduced into Parliament, and as I understand, it's bipartisan supported, which is great news. And as I'm hearing right across the basin, the quicker the better is what the communities want for our office to have that independent voice, independent arbitrator, validator and communicator of truth to be established, to get a lot more confidence back.
You're a confident person by saying bipartisan to do with basin plan legislation. Well, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. What do you do in the meantime?
Yeah, so in the interim role, what we've been doing is high-level engagement, whether virtually because of the COVID restrictions early in the last 16 weeks, or face-to-face and getting out on the ground to hear about what the office needs to be constructed like, what sort of functionality we'll have from what is transferred from the MDBA's compliance section across to us, to help us understand how we're going to need to work, identifying field office locations that we've now identified will be placed so we get access across each of the jurisdictions and be community facing. That's very important, and doing a lot of the machinery government arrangements that are necessary to get an office operational.
So even while you're waiting, you're hiring now?
Yeah, advertisements went out today for 5 field officers who will be the community facing points of contact for anyone that's involved in the basin that has concerns or has areas within our control and remit of the legislation to go to, and provide that information, be the real interface and face of our office.
Will you have the powers you feel you need to do your job? Your predecessor didn't have the powers to compel witnesses and ultimately walked away from the job because of that. Is that something that worries you?
No, that I've seen the legislation, and while I can't talk to it in specifics because it's part of a process that's before the Parliament, absolutely, there's indicatively I can give everyone the assurance that the powers are there to allow me to do the job and compel people to provide information and even appear before me in what we call an inquiry, to get to the truth of an issue or an answer for matters that may be referred to me by the Minister to investigate, or inquiries that the office initiates to get to the bottom of some problem areas. And we know there's a lot out there. So how it works for everyone's explanation is that we'll receive a letter of expectation from the Minister. What is our role to do? And fundamentally it's to rebuild trust and confidence in the Basin Plan, and to make sure that we're communicating independently the truth and breaking down a lot of those myths that are out there that cause a lot of division.
And to find wrongdoing too, as well as that.
Absolutely. But so the second part is to be a regulator of regulators. So the front-end regulation will still be carried out by the states, and some of the delay in the legislation coming forward has been initial how it was drafted. There was a lot of duplication, and that doesn't help us do the role, nor does it help the states, nor does it help those being regulated to who we're answering to, who are we responsible to. So that's all being cleared up. My understanding is the states are far happier with the legislation now, so there's more clarity and certainty, and we can get on with the job.
How much convincing do you have to do at places like this to tell people that you're not a political appointment? You're a former National Party member itself. When you were announced as a job, it ultimately became a political issue. Does it take a lot of work to try and convince people otherwise?
I think people talk to me for 5 minutes and understand I had no political history going into the job. I was a local member at Dubbo that wanted to get outcomes for my community that was neglected by governments for decades. I got that job done and I left Parliament, I left politics, and I'm happily way away from it. And this role's not political. This role is truly independent. We're not policy setters, so that's for the politicians and the communities to debate in the right forums and appropriate forums. Our job is to ensure compliance with the policies, with the regulations, with the plan and the compacts that are out there.
Being in a job like this, though, do you regret having the National Party tag next to your name then? Is that going to make your life harder?
Not at all. I'm not defined by my 8 years membership as a National. I'm 51 years of age. So if you do the math, I've been Troy Grant, served in the police force for 22 years independently. I've served my community and for my entire life, and I've lived in the basin for 80% of my life. So. No, I can understand the difference,
but some people won't understand the difference, and some people won't get past that, will they?
Well, I disagree in that some of the main critics was Senator Rex Patrick, who through the standing committee raised those concerns, through the press raised those concerns. I said any time we'll sit down and meet and address those concerns. I sat down with him. He doesn't hold those concerns anymore, so I don't think they're insurmountable. It's cheap political point scoring because New South Wales Water Minister, a former colleague of mine, criticised my appointment, said I was capable, competent and experienced to do the job, but shouldn't have it because I was a National. Point to a better reason why I shouldn't have the job, or give some examples of what disqualifies me. I've always been about the community. I've always been about outcomes. And when I was offered the role, a lot of my mates said to me, "Are you nuts? Like, why would you get into such a complicated contested and complex area of public policy?" And I said, because I'm driven by public service and there's so much to fix and somebody's got to do the job, so I accepted the offer and put my hand up.
So much about what we've heard at this conference, and no doubt you've been listening, has been about trying to restore faith and get people to trust officers, and you've got a big role ahead of you. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Yeah, welcome to and available to you anytime. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's Troy Grant, the Interim Inspector General for Murray-Darling on water compliance, joining you on the Country Hour. It is 1:45. We're going to hear from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority in just a few moments. I can see they've arrived, but before that, let's go back to the Bureau, because there's an interesting tool that has been developed. Since 2007, the Bureau of Meteorology has been the agency for national water information, and the BOM's General Manager of the Water Sector Program, Matt Colton, told Kelly Hollingworth about work that's underway to make information easier to access.
We actually collect data from 237 different agencies across Australia. So those agencies range from everyone from the really large state government departments and the big dam owners and utilities, right down to some quite small local governments, irrigation districts. We're now at the point where we collect about 15,000 files a day, and that goes into various products and also databases on our website where people come and find it. We really needed a national agency to provide national water data in a consistent way, because prior to that it was sitting siloed in different agencies in different states, sometimes in different formats and different standards. And I think the reasoning of the day was that if the Commonwealth Government's going to get involved and start making national water policy, then we need national trusted information to do it. And the Bureau was chosen through that because we're a public agency, but we sort of sit a little bit independent from the policy discussion of the day, and we can be trusted just to provide honest information.
You've got a new website that's going to be released later this year. How much work's gone into making sure that it's what people want and it's easy for them to find? Instead
of, I guess, scurrying away with a bunch of scientists for a few years and building a product that we think is really cool, we're actually really early in the design process launch a very basic website that people can then get on and use and tell us what's missing or what they don't understand, and then we'll take that feedback on board, add new features and release 5 subsequent versions over the next 2 years. The other key part of that design process is that all of the Bureau's information is really dependent on our partnerships, particularly with state governments. And so as we, I guess, get that research in, and we need to obtain more data from our partners, then we work through that in collaboration with them. So doing it in this process ensures that we get it right and that we build something that communities want, and also enables us to work with our partners to supply that data.
The Murray-Darling Basin Water Information Portal will be available, or the first version of it, at the end of June. How do people take a look at it and provide you with the feedback that you're after?
So it'll be hopefully very easy to find on our website, bom.gov.au/water. There will be a few options. Is one, just flick us an email, water@bom.gov.au. We love hearing questions from the community. We traditionally have a very good relationship with a lot of sciencey type people, and probably are seeking to have a bit more relationships with some community members. The other option is there'll be an option on the webpage itself to sign up to one of our testers, in which case we actually get one of our designers to sit down with users and have a discussion about what they like and what they don't like. We've already done a bit of that over the past 6 months to build version 1, but we'd like to do a lot more of that going forward.
What kind of information can people expect to see when this first version's released?
So I think the first version will see some relatively basic information the Bureau currently has across probably 12 different products. So things like obviously stream flow, but also soil moisture, recent rainfall, water market prices, water allocation information. Another important feature of the website is there is a lot of agencies that operate in the basin, as basin communities know, and we'll provide that high-level information of what's going on, but also really accessible links for people to start at our website and then go further into the agency that they really need to engage with.
That's Matthew Colton from the Bureau of Meteorology speaking there to Kelly Hollingworth, who's been here in Wentworth with me the last couple of days. It's been awesome to have Kel, and she's been a huge help as well. You continue to hear her stories here on ABC Rural on the Country Hour. Let's welcome in Andrew Reynolds, the Executive Director of River Management at the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. A lot of people will be looking to talk to you too as well today, Andrew Reynolds, because there's water in the system and decisions are being made about which way it goes.
Yep, there certainly is. We've had some good flows coming down from the north, with probably around about 1,000 gigalitres we expect to make its way into Menindee Lakes over the next little while. And so
1,000, that's more than first thought.
Yeah, it's progressively increased. It's really difficult to estimate the volume of water that will come through from any event in the Northern Basin. As the water moves its way down through the system, it gets to narrower parts in the rivers, breaks back out onto the floodplains. Some of it goes into billabongs, some of it soaks back into the ground and before coming back to the river channel. And so as it moves through the system, we have to keep re-estimating just how much water is likely to make its way to the end.
And Menindee Lakes and their operation has been a big focus of this conference so far today. Melinda Pavey, the New South Wales Minister, had a swipe at the MDBA, but also at the South Australian Government for calling on water immediately to be released from the lakes down the system. How much water is going to be released?
So we've made a call around about 30 gigalitres. So we've got about 1,000 gigalitres we expect to come into the lakes, a relatively modest amount we're going to draw from the lakes now. April and May have sort of turned quite dry on the Murray, so we need just a little bit of extra water in the system to make sure that we've got all of the demands covered. Calling some water out of Menindee now also has some benefits in the Lower Darling itself, a bit of a flush through that system that's had very low flows or no flows over the last few years. So being able to draw a bit of water through that system now will be quite beneficial. It'll overtop some of the weirs in the Lower Darling, allow fish to move around again, inundate a little bit more of the riverbanks that provides habitat and food for fish. And so we think doing it now on balance, sort of weighing up all those things, is the optimum thing to do.
Does that highlight the fear from the community about what happened last time with Menindee going down so quickly and then another drought hitting, that there's a lot of concern about how you're going to manage those lakes?
Absolutely. People are concerned. I mean, the Menindee Lakes are really important to the local community. They're the town water supply. There's an enormous amount of cultural heritage there. First Nations have got a really strong connection to that part of the landscape. And so people are rightly concerned about what the future may hold. And of course, there's great uncertainty about the next rainfall event for communities and for us as water managers. So we have to plan around that. We've been working really closely with the local communities through Water New South Wales, who have got some forums established to engage with a range of community people, and we've been able to talk through what we were planning, understand how we might adjust that to make it work well for the local community, as well as meet the needs of people on the Murray who also have, a strong interest in how that water is used.
Well, one of them put it to me earlier, they better not mess it up this time, but I'll leave that as a comment. I did want to ask you about this. There is a text message here that came in asking about the sand slug as the reason why the Barmah Choke can get less water through it at the moment. Your work released late last year, I think it was, showed that gold mining sand from gold mining has been making its way down the system and it's getting stuck, and less water can now get down the tightest point of the river. Are you still confident that scientific work is the reason?
Yeah, look, we've certainly been working through that. I guess the key thing here for us is that sand is present in the choke and it is restricting flows through that part of the river, and that's something we need to manage.
So it's just how it's got there.
Yeah. So the fact that it's there is the thing we have to manage now. The reason we were looking for an explanation for where it came from was because if that was continuing to happen, then the potential to intervene and stop it at its source exists. There's been a lot of emphasis on whether it was gold mining or not. We still believe that is the most likely source, although land clearing and other things probably contributed to it.
And we'll probably have to leave it there because I know I have to get to markets and I get in trouble if I didn't play them. But Andrew Reynolds, thank you very much for that, and we'll continue to have that conversation anyway. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Warwick.
That bell is ringing for him as well. Andrew Reynolds of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. Let's go to markets now. We'll jump straight into it. No time for a sting. We'll go to Leanne Dax at Wodonga.
Good afternoon. 855 cattle sold to a big field of buyers. Veal were in short supply, but quality was excellent. Heavy cattle numbers increased and vendors were well rewarded. Veal sold firm to 5 cents better, 4.40 to 5.13. Trade steers slipped back 15 cents, 4.10 to 4.58. Feeder steers were back 5, quality related, 4.05 to 4.65. Trade heifers firm to 5 better, 4.10 to 4.55. Feeder heifers 3.90 to 4.52. Heavy steers 500 to 600 kilos sold 10 cents better, 3.81 to 4.21. Bullocks surged 21 cents, 3.63 to 4.15. Heavy heifers with shape 3.72 to 4.10, and Friesians 2.94 to 3.25. I'm Leanne Dax for MLA.
So Warrnambool Cattle and Eric Gastrain.
An additional exporter operated on the 858 mixed quality cattle at Warrnambool. Prices lifted for grown steers by 10 to 25 cents, and Friesian steers gained 5 to 10 cents a kilogram. Dairy bred grown heifers jumped 35 cents, and beef bulls were 20 cents dearer. The few vealers made 430 to 460 cents, restockers purchasing most and paying to 476. The yearlings were between 382 and 465 cents. Grown steers made 380 to 424 cents, Friesian steers 310 to 343. The beef cows made 330 to 342 cents, dairy cows 270 to 312. The leaner dairy cows sold between 245 and 260 cents. Poor to plain quality were from 210 to 240, and beef bulls sold from 300 to 319 cents. It's been Eric Gastrain reporting for MLA.
Let's head to Leongatha and Brendan Fletcher.
G'day Warwick, there were 450 more at 1900 with the usual buyers operating in a dearer market. Quality was wintry with most cattle showing the cold. Trade cattle sold to firm demand, grown steers and bullocks lifted 12 to 15 cents, manufacturing steers gained 10 to 20, cows improved 5 to 15 cents with processors loading cows for an estimated 5.77 to 6.67 cents a kilogram carcass weight. Heavy bulls sold firm. Grown steers 3.99 to 4.37, bullocks 400 to 4.25, heavy Friesian steers 300 to 3.56, crossbreds 3.48 to 4.16. Most light and medium weight cows 2.28 to 2.79, heavyweights 2.56 to 3.45, the better shaped heavy bulls 2.92 to 3.19. This is Brendan Fletcher reporting for MLA.
Thank you very much for that, Brendan. Lucky last today. We'll head to Hamilton Lambs. Here's Chris Agnew.
Thanks, Warwick. Agents yard 11,684 lambs and 4,100 sheep at Hamilton. The quality of the offering was very good, being similar to last week. However, the sheep offering was very plain with very little weight on offer. Restocking competition remained strong and they paid up to $185. In the 18 to 22 kg well finished were $5 per head stronger. Lambs back to the paddock 16 to 18 kgs 1 and 2 scores were up to $20 dearer, and all other trade lambs were firm. The general cost of lambs in the 18 to 26 kilo averaging between $7.50 and $8.60. The sheep market was firm to dearer in places. General cost of mutton this week was $6.40 to $6.90. At Hamilton, this is Chris Agnew reporting for MLA.
Well done, Chris. Thank you very much for that. That's all the time we have for you on the Country Hour today. They're ringing the bell for us here. It's been wonderful to bring this program to you, and it's been wonderful to be in Wentworth the last couple of days. Remember, our email address is countryhour@abc.net.au. You can send us an email, tell us where to go, tell us where we should be travelling to next. Love getting out and about, love getting to meet you like I got to meet Stephen from Kerwa yesterday. It's an absolute joy. If the wait for tomorrow, me being in the studio, is too much, head to our website, abc.net.au/rural. Really interesting information up there about Argentina, one of the world's biggest beef exporters, putting a snap ban on their exports, and also Indonesia banning Indian buffalo meat going into their country. You can go there and read that now. I'll catch you tomorrow from the studio.